Coming up, if you label the Founding Fathers as racist and nothing more, then you'll have a much less difficult time defending yourself when you abandon the founding documents. You'll be much less likely to be found wanting when your intelligence is compared to the genius of Jefferson and your character is compared to the bravery of Washington. We understand what's going on, and we're sick of it. Welcome back to Political Spirits. I'm your host, Franklin Rye. We still stand for the proposition that the left and the right should have a few drinks and talk. Compromise is not a requirement. If those discussions result in us changing or even abandoning our positions, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. We just need to talk to each other. In that way, we can unify through speech. And if the discussion becomes a bit heated, at the end of the night, we should still be able to split up the bar tab and be on our way. So what are we going to talk about this week? Let's talk for a moment about the Supreme Court's decision to grant certiorari to hear 3 cases in which President Trump was challenging subpoenas for his financial records. One of the cases involves a subpoena out of New York for his financial records, and the other 2 cases involve congressional subpoenas for his financial records. Trump has been fighting those subpoenas, asserting that he has protection against compliance with them as part of his executive authority. I'm not going to talk about the legal analysis of the underlying issue. I don't think you're expecting that, and I'm not sure you'd be able to stay awake if you were driving if that was what I chose to cover. I just want to make a very brief point. Do you remember what Professor Jonathan Turley said when he testified as a legal expert in the impeachment inquiry hearing before the Judiciary Committee? Do you remember what stood out most? For me, what stood out the most is when he said that Congress itself would be engaging in an abuse of power if it impeached the president for purportedly obstructing Congress by challenging the congressional subpoena in court, rather than simply accepting and complying with the subpoena. He made the point that the legislature and the president are co-equal branches of government, and that it's the job of the courts to resolve conflicts between those 2 branches. Therefore, as he noted, Congress would be abusing its authority if it filed an impeachment against the president based on him exercising his authority and his right to go to the courts to challenge the subpoenas. Well, look what happened. The Supreme Court agreed to take up President Trump's challenge to those subpoenas. And guess what? One of the 2 impeachment counts which the House Judiciary Committee sent to the floor of the House for a decision as to whether to impeach is a count for obstruction of Congress based on President Trump's challenge to the subpoena by going to the courts rather than simply complying with it. If the House of Representatives votes to impeach based on that count, it will be doing exactly what Professor Turley said would constitute an abuse of power, and it would be doing it in the face of the Supreme Court having agreed to take up the case challenging the subpoena. In other words, by taking up that case, the Supreme Court has said that it's appropriate to challenge the subpoena in the courts. That doesn't mean President Trump will win on that challenge, but it does mean that use of the courts is appropriate. In the face of that, I don't see how the House of Representatives can move forward with impeachment on that specific count. But then again, based on the way the Democrats in the Intelligence Committee and Judiciary Committee have conducted themselves so far, nothing will surprise me. Next topic. Updated election prediction and rationale. Let's talk for a moment about my repeated predictions that Donald Trump will win re-election provided that the economy doesn't take a dive. As I've said before, if we go into a recession, all bets are off. But if we don't, I've predicted that he will win, and he'll win by a larger electoral margin than in 2016. Keeping in mind that I live in Broward County, Florida, which surprisingly has a large number of Republicans, but that's only because of the high population of the county itself. The fact is that Broward County has a massive number of Democrats and is considered the most reliably Democratic county in the state, with the exception of one very small county in North Florida. Keeping that in mind, I can tell you that I've encountered a great deal of questioning of my predictions from locals. Many of them just don't see it the way I see it. Much of that is because of the political makeup of Broward County. I remember during the election in 2016, much was made of the claim that Donald Trump had offended women voters and that he was horribly underwater with them in polling. There was a seemingly endless stream of stories talking about the gender gap. The claim that there was a massive gap between female support for Hillary Clinton and female support for Donald Trump. I didn't see it. Women voters have never been a monolithic entity. For as long as I can remember, more women have registered Democrat than Republican, but that has not been a function of gender, but rather a function of race and marital status combined with gender. In other words, the purported gender gap exists between Democrats and Republicans when the women voters are either unmarried or minorities. Married women are more likely to be Republican. Caucasian women are more likely to be Republican. Therefore, to describe it as a gender gap is at minimum incomplete and arguably misleading. It's a function of gender in combination with other characteristics which describe that gap between those who are registered Republicans and those who are registered Democrats. So why am I digressing into this discussion of the purported gender gap between the parties? Because in 2016, when we were told that Hillary Clinton was going to sweep to victory on the women's vote, I regularly encountered gatherings, including non-political gatherings, where nearly every woman present opposed Hillary. Could it be that I only hang out with Republicans? Not really, but nearly every one of the women at those gatherings was married and had kids. So why do I bring this up? Because it shows the difficulty of trying to determine what's going to happen in an election with anecdotal evidence from your encounters. Would I have come away with a different impression if the gatherings I attended were comprised primarily of single women or minority women? It's quite likely. So why do I think that Trump is going to win re-election? And why do I think that the margin of victory in the Electoral College will be larger than in 2016? I think that because of 1, the condition of the economy, 2, the Democrats have moved way too far to the left, and 3, notwithstanding his brusque demeanor, President Trump's performance has been much more moderated and presidential than his critics predicted. Now, some of you may be a little surprised by that last point, so I'll get to it in just a moment. But first, the improvement in the economy is undeniable. Unemployment has dropped across the board and with all measured demographic groups. It is extremely low, notwithstanding the return of large numbers of people to the workforce. The Democratic Party is flirting with full-on socialism, and its leading candidates are pushing things like Medicare for All and the Green New Deal. Proposals with price tags so absurdly large that they almost can't be taken seriously. If actually passed, they would destroy the economy, which makes it seem like those Democratic candidates are either deceiving the electorate or are hell-bent on tanking the economy in pursuit of their proposals. Furthermore, multiple candidates have aligned themselves with far-left proposals like reparations for slavery and mandating that women's sports accept biological men who identify as women. And finally, as I said, President Trump's performance has been much more moderated and presidential than his critics predicted. How can I say that when confronted with his over-the-top tweets on a nearly daily basis? Think of it this way. Whenever you're confronted with President Trump mocking someone in a tweet, and the press goes nuts about it, think about what we were told prior to his election. We weren't told if this man gets elected, he's going to put out tweets that call people names and are far less well-mannered than we've come to expect from American presidents. If that had been what we had been told, most people would have responded, "Really? That's all we have to worry about? He might offend some people in a tweet?" No, we were told he was going to go nuts. We were told he was going to start a nuclear war. We were told it was like putting the Tasmanian devil in charge of the nuclear codes. He'd be a spinning tornado around the Oval Office like the Tasmanian devil of cartoon fame, and we'd be lucky if he didn't inadvertently or deliberately start a conflict that would incinerate the entire planet. We were told that we couldn't believe a word he said, that he wouldn't really nominate conservatives to the courts as he promised. We were told he was just pretending to be a conservative, and there was no telling what he would actually do. Never Trump conservatives told us that on a daily basis. We were expected to believe that he was an uncontrollable sexist who would likely be grabbing women you-know-where at his first opportunity. We were told that he would destroy our international relationships. We were told that across the board his presidency would be an unmitigated disaster. And I have no doubt that there were a significant number of Republicans who believed it, and that some of them chose not to vote for Donald Trump because of it. But what are we seeing now? The number of never-Trumpers out there is a fraction of what it was. Sure, there are still never-Trumpers, especially among the political commentariat class, but far fewer than there used to be. President Trump has done a very good job of unifying the Republican Party, with support numbers rivaling those of Ronald Reagan within the party. And why shouldn't they rival those of Ronald Reagan? Look at what he's achieved. It's not just that the unemployment rates have dropped substantially, but also, for the first time in a long time, wage rates are rising, and they're rising most among blue-collar workers, the core of his base. Promise fulfilled. And look at the string of conservative judges he's appointed, and they've been confirmed. They're all conservative, and the numbers have been record-setting. Promise fulfilled. And the U.S. Embassy in Israel has been moved to Jerusalem. Promise fulfilled. And ISIS has been pushed out of all of the territory it held in the Middle East. And, as promised, it was done in a matter of months. Promise fulfilled. And contrary to the predictions of so many of the political commentators whose faces were all over cable news throughout the election, the stock market has just kept rising. Low unemployment, a record-setting stock market, rising wages, conservative judges, and multiple other promises kept. So he occasionally sends out a tweet that makes you think, maybe he shouldn't have sent that. And that's supposed to make us think we should vote for the Democrat? Not likely. Not even close. Once you compare what was said about Trump by the commentators running up to the 2016 election and compare that to his actual performance and actions since then, there is no denying it. He has been dramatically better than his critics predicted, and we will see the impact of that undeniable fact when the 2020 election returns start to come in. As I've said before, so long as we don't go into a recession, Donald Trump will win re-election, and he'll do it with an electoral margin higher than the one in 2016. Next topic. When it comes to Western politics, is there no such thing as a bad hair day? If you're like me, you watched with excitement as Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party won a landslide election in the UK this past week, giving the Conservative Party its largest majority since that held by Margaret Thatcher in 1987. There's been no shortage of comparisons drawn between the rise of Boris Johnson to Prime Minister in the UK and the rise of Donald Trump to the presidency. Both saw something that should be obvious, but alas, the left, in the form of Democrat leadership in America and Labour Party leadership in the UK, is apparently incapable of seeing, and that is that much of the working class in their respective countries sees their political leadership as dismissive of them and refusing to recognize what they want. In the UK, they want the leadership to act as the results of the Brexit election directed them to act, and focus on moving Britain forward, separate from the European Union. In the U.S., they want the leadership to get illegal immigration under control and to focus on the problems confronting the people, recognizing that their job is to represent the interests of America first. In both countries, there is ample evidence revealed on a daily basis that the political class, the ruling class, the highly educated class are repulsed by the average ordinary working class members of their society and think that they, rather than the working class, know better what needs to be done. Perhaps in earlier times the working class might have believed that they were right, but now, with 24/7 news coverage, with every cell phone potentially acting as a would-be citizen journalist's video camera, and with the internet offering widespread availability of political commentary from all sides, they aren't buying it anymore. They've seen the videos of their supposed betters, prosperous city-dwelling professionals, students at universities with stellar reputations, and elected officials at the highest level mocking them, cursing them, referring to them as deplorable, irredeemable, and otherwise too stupid to make an informed decision at the ballot box. They've seen students at Yale, by reputation at the pinnacle of higher education in America, have a hissy fit in front of a professor whose wife had written an email criticizing a dean's communication to students, imploring that they not wear offensive or unacceptable Halloween costumes. His wife, also a professor, had basically argued that the dean was being too politically correct and he should have cut the students some slack. In response, a group of students surrounded the professor whose wife had written the email, screamed at him, insulted him, said that he should lose his job, and when he tried to calmly engage with them, one student literally had a meltdown worthy of a small child and stormed away. I saw that video. Millions saw that video. And anyone who ever assumed that by virtue of gaining admission to Yale, a student had shown the ability to lead this country will probably never make that assumption again. I noticed that the students had no interest in engaging in a productive, calm, intelligent discussion involving an exchange of ideas. They had reached their conclusion, and the act of disagreeing it was in and of itself offensive as they saw it. It was as if the act of disagreeing with them was an act of violence. They had no interest in learning what others thought if their thoughts were any different from their own. And we've seen the similar closed-mindedness of our political class. Everyone knows that if you allow millions of unskilled laborers to cross into the country illegally and work, they will stagnate and depress wages for unskilled citizen and legal immigrant laborers. It's undeniable, but much of our political class refuses to admit it. We've watched as much of academia, the media, the political class on the left, and activists on the left try to erase much of our history by labeling individuals as defined by their failings which are indicative of the time in which they lived. And we know what's going on. If you can erase the pillars of history in a country, you don't have to compete with them when you try to divert the country away from what has worked. And in the case of America, what has worked to an unprecedented extent. If you label the Founding Fathers as racist and nothing more, then you'll have a much less difficult time defending yourself when you abandon the founding documents. You'll be much less likely to be found wanting when your intelligence is compared to the genius of Jefferson and your character is compared to the bravery of Washington. We understand what's going on, and we're sick of it. The Brexit election in the UK was in June 2016. 5 months later, Donald Trump was elected president in the United States. I and many others believe that Brexit foretold the election of Donald Trump. The same dissatisfaction that led to the Brexit vote led to the election of Trump. The Brexit vote was close, and so was the election of Trump. Sure, his electoral college margin was large, but look at the individual state results in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, which were the key to his victory. The margins were razor thin. Now compare that to the landslide election the Conservatives won last week in the UK. What changed? Why was the Brexit vote so close, but the election last week was a landslide? Well, look at the predictions that were made before the Brexit vote. The supposed experts told us that the British markets would collapse if Brexit passed. It passed, and the markets were fine. Life went on. The experts were wrong. Now cross the pond and look at what happened in America. We were told that the markets would collapse if Donald Trump won. He won, and the markets, and the rest of the economy for that matter, soared. The experts were wrong. So what's going to happen now? Donald Trump is going to soar to an even larger win than in 2016. Once again, the British election will foretell the events in the U.S. And a New Yorker with a crazy hairstyle will continue to lead the U.S. as a prime minister who was born in New York and with his own crazy hairstyle will continue to lead the UK. And the experts will sit scratching their own likely bald heads, wondering what happened. And I'll lean back with a beer, ice cold of course, in recognition of the side of the Atlantic on which I sit, and watch it all happen, confident that Americans and Brits, as two connected peoples, just tend to get it right in the end. I hope you think that I have it right. I'll be back next week with another episode of Political Spirits, Getting It Right again. Please join me. Be sure to tell your friends about Political Spirits and like the podcast on Facebook at Political Spirits. And follow me and the podcast on Twitter at Franklin Rye. And remember, all episodes are now on YouTube as well, and the YouTube channel is named Political Spirits Network. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. This is Franklin Rye. Thank you for listening.